we thought warranted discussion. That's quite all right. We are now recording. It's a great segue into some of our housekeeping. So as you may have just heard, we are recording today's session. My understanding is Smart Growth America will be hosting these recordings in the near future. Folks from Smart Growth America give me blank stares. Hopefully that is correct. I believe if that is not correct in the future, that's what I was told at least. Other housekeeping, those of you who are here in person, there's a restroom basically straight out the door down the hallway on the right. Many of you I know have used the wonderful device that's sitting in front of me, an owl, but if you have not, welcome to your first experience with an owl. Owls are great in that they kind of track around the room depending on who is making noise, which is helpful in that it will highlight the person who's speaking for those people joining us virtually, and hello everyone joining us virtually. But that also means if you make any noise in the meeting, the camera will zoom in on you and shame you for making any noise. So it's a great way to encourage people to be quiet. So thank you in advance for doing that. We here at the NEA are the largest funder of the arts in the country, largest in terms of number of grants and geographic reach, not necessarily in terms of dollar amount. And I oversee the design and creative placemaking work here, which has a number of intersections with the smart growth world. So we'll talk about some of those in just a moment. So really excited to host this discussion. I myself formerly was with Smart Growth America for a number of years, so great to have a couple of my former colleagues joining us here today as well. Really quickly, our agenda for today is to go through some welcomes, as we're doing right now. We will then jump into the panel discussion, which will involve everyone sitting to my right, as well as a couple of people joining us virtually. We'll have a little bit of time for Q&A. We'll then divide this physical room into two groups and march down the hallway a couple feet down there to have some breakout discussions after the panel discussion. The virtual folks will also be subdivided into a few different groups, so stay tuned for that part. You are implicated and involved in that as well. We'll come back here for a little bit of a report out at the end and then part ways for the happy hour. So you have to come back in order to find out where the happy hour is, unless you look at your agenda where the address is also listed. Please come back anyway to hear the report outs. And we'll wrap up by 5 o'clock and move on after that. I think that covers all the welcome and housekeeping from me. So again, thank you for being here. And I'll hand things over to Venus Welch-White, who is sitting right over here. Thank you so much. Take it away.
Thank you so much, everyone. Good afternoon, Venus Welch-White. I bring greetings from APA, Office of the Administrator. I serve as the Acting Deputy Director of the newly established Office of Agriculture and Rural Affairs. For those that do not know, the administrator actually hails from rural eastern North Carolina, so he has a bent and understands rural communities, and certainly appreciate the invitation to really highlight the important work that's happening in these topics, and obviously supporting rural communities, which I think is important to each of us around the table. Just a little bit about myself. I'm originally from Florida. I went to Tuskegee University, so I spent 11 years in a rural community. I got my undergrad degree there as well as my graduate degrees. So I spent a lot of time there and really understand some of these issues up close and personal. I started my federal career actually with the USDA and working for rural development for 6 years. So not only have I lived in a rural community, I have worked to support rural economies prior to coming over to the EPA. We have several different touch points in our Office of Agriculture and Rural Affairs. We essentially support the conduit of all things in the ag space. And while I think people can recognize that the majority of agriculture is rural, all rural is not ag. And so really making those levels of differentiation, and sometimes they can be kind of, a couple together. And I think in our office, we do a really good job of understanding that there are some rural issues and equities, and then there are agricultural equities, and sometimes they're the same, but they are not often the same. And so really making sure that we're having the right conversations and bringing the right perspectives to the table. We also house the office, the Farm, Ranch, and Rural Communities Federal Advisory Committee, which is has been established, I want to say, back in 2007. It provides independent policy recommendations to the administrator of EPA. It is one of 23 federal advisory committees within the EPA. And so we are fortunate enough to house one of those federal advisory committees in our office. I actually serve as a designated federal officer for that, for the FRCC. And we are working right now through nominations just closed. So we're working to announce and name new committee members. So we're looking forward to doing that. In addition, we actually have recommendations that just came out. We hosted a meeting in August last month in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Fun fact, most of our meetings are actually in rural places that are either rural or ag or both. And so the committee passed 32 recommendations, and many of them really focused on some of the rural equities, some of the TIC-tacs, the different programs within the EPA. We're really looking forward to for those being announced and for the administrator to respond back to those recommendations. There's a couple touch points that we work within our office. Obviously, the Office of Community Revitalization that houses the local people places program. So I'm sure you'll hear more about that today. Office of Water, which has a closing the wastewater gap. Access gap, and so I'm not sure if anybody from OW will be on, but that is really primarily focused on really looking at the infrastructure, and there's a lot of money and technical assistance. Oftentimes, when we're having these conversations, we're really talking about technical assistance, infrastructure, and really boots on the ground and kind of meeting the communities where they are, recognizing that oftentimes it's limited capacity. And last but certainly not least, we participate actively in our Rural Partners Network. I serve as the Rural Desk Officer for EPA. I believe my friend and colleague I saw on the agenda, Christine Sorensen. So I worked with her when I was at USDA, and we work really closely within our Rural Partners Network. So with that being said, I just wanted to obviously offer welcome. I'm not going to be able to stay the entire time because I'm running into lots of little meetings all day, but I will participate for as much as I can, and looking forward to a robust conversation. Again, thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks so much. Before I introduce Scala next to me, I just wanted to acknowledge a couple of NEA folks in the room, Courtney, Jennifer, and Carolyn, and I think many of you met Jesus downstairs, so thank you all for your help in being here today too. So that leads me to introduce our Senior Deputy Chair, Scala Sisk, who's sitting right next to me.
Thank you. Thank you. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. So just to share a little bit about my background, I come to my work in the arts actually from a background in housing and community development and community investment. So the boilerplate that you read in terms of the reason for the Smart Growth Network is really what has driven a lot of my work. It's really trying to understand how change happens in place and how that change can happen in ways that are best for residents, best for people in those places, and for environmental outcomes. And so it is really a pleasure to be here. I'd say that at the NEA, we have long seen this appreciation for the intersection between arts and the built environment, and the ways in which investments can happen in place that work in the interest of residents, and in terms of community, in terms of economic and social outcomes, and more, and outcomes even beyond that. I know that part of why, again, why I came about this work is that that often there has been a disconnect in terms of the ways that investments have happened, and who benefits, and as we look for ways to make sure that the decisions about where investments flow, where resources flow, how they're designed, the process by which they're used in terms of development, and then stewarded and programmed, that there is a role for artists and arts and how that happens in a way that really appreciates the history and culture of people and places. And so you can see that in a lot of our funding and a lot of our programs. The work that Ben leads and Courtney in terms of our creative placemaking program, the Our Town program. We have technical assistance, a technical assistance program attached to that really helps to support some of the cross-sector partnerships that enable that planning and design work that works again in the interest of people and place. The Citizens Institute on Rural Design, I think, is one of our strongest programs, and it really provides an important avenue for residents to take what ideas about what they want to see for the future of their place and have some structure to really to work together around how that can come to be, and having art and culture be a through line in ways of expressing and and really connecting and finding a place for belonging in terms of the future of their communities. And then I would point to the Mayor's Institute on City Design. So where we're working with mayors in a similar way of appreciating that that as they think about some of the challenges that they're facing in their cities, that there is perhaps maybe not the most obvious angle that they might have thought about in terms of where solutions lie, but that art is a resource there, and that artists are a resource in finding solutions that are creative and that are resonant to a diverse set of stakeholders. And so just a couple of the resources, and then, we at the NEA are stewarding artists and arts, so that at the forefront of what we're doing, and making sure that our funding is available, really that we think broadly about how we understand what art means and how it is created and how it is stewarded and how our resources are flowing in a way that supports that. And we also think that and are a resource to our federal partners, to our partners across sectors, in really appreciating the ways in which art and artists and culture can be embedded in policies, in programs, to really find inclusive and creative solutions, practices. So one exciting pilot that we have underway is actually with EPA and the Office of Water, where we have been a partner to EPA in creating an artist in residency program around their watershed work. And for what we understand together is that by artists having a role in their water restoration work, that there is a chance for residents and community to better understand the issues at play, that there is an opportunity to ensure that the interests of community are able to be connected to decisions that are made around investments around infrastructure. So it's an exciting, and we think there's more ways that we can partner. And so we're interested in having those conversations about, what are the resources we have available that others can be made aware of, and what are resources we need to create, and ways that we can work in partnership to make that, to find, again, the kind of shared interests and shared solutions for people and places. So really think that it's so important that this network exists, that there's a structure for how we can talk together and work together, and just glad that you're here, and thank you.
Thanks so much.
Yeah.
One last piece of housekeeping. I just realized, sitting right in front of me, there are snacks in the back of the room. For those of you here in person, I know many of you have noticed those already. Sorry to those who are joining virtually. We are good at hybrid meetings, but have not figured out how to share the snacks or the Zoom yet. So with that, really excited to announce our panel and get into the discussion for today. So I'll just start by reading names and titles rather than full bios, which you all should have in your agendas, both digital versions, those who are attending on Zoom, and in person here in the room. So sitting immediately to my right, moderating our discussion today, is Stephanie Bertena, Recreation Economy for Rural Communities Program Manager with the Office of Community Revitalization at the EPA. To her right, my former colleague, John Robert Smith, Chairman of Transportation for America and Policy Advisor at Smart Growth America. To his right, Joel Mills, Senior Director, Center for Communities by Design at Architects Foundation. And then two folks joining us online who I think will be spotlighted. I see one of them showing up right now. Christine Sorensen, who is the National Lead for Engagement Rural Partners Network, U.S. Department of Agriculture, Rural Development. And finally, also joining us virtually, Corey Hayden, Program Manager, Investment and Community Initiatives with Assist-U Economic Development. Please take it away.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all so much for being here in person and online. My name is Steph Bertena, and I'm just so pleased to be able to facilitate this panel on the important topic at our Smart Growth Network meeting this quarter on applying smart growth principles in rural communities. So again, I am with EPA's Office of Community Revitalization here in DC, and I've been with our office for 15 years. I hail from rural Delaware, so I come from a small town myself, though I've been living in DC for 18 years now, and I'm raising my kids here. Again, thank you to NEA for hosting us here. The power of the Smart Growth Network is really made real when we host these meetings with different partners throughout the year. So we just thank you all for your hospitality and for hosting us here. So as I said, I've been at EPA for 15 years. I've been around. Most of my time here at EPA has been working pretty much exclusively with rural communities and small towns. When I first started in our office back in 2008, 2009, we were working on a publication that we partnered together with ICMA on. It's called Putting Smart Growth to Work in Rural Communities. Oh, yeah, somebody's got it. Thank you. I did not plant that. That was great, thank you. And I was thinking about this fundamental document that we worked on way back then. So 15 years ago, we were asking the question, how does smart growth show up differently in rural communities and small towns? Does it? Is it the same as it is in an urban community or a suburban community? And so really seeking to answer that question and to think about were there ways that we as EPA, as all of the Smart Growth Network, and all the partners can support rural communities and small towns as they're trying to plan for the future of their communities. So we asked that question 15 years ago. Since then, I think we've been hard at work at EPA. I know many of you have been hard at work working with rural communities and small towns across the country. An OCR that has looked a lot like providing planning assistance directly to rural communities and small towns, meeting them where they are, helping them plan for the future of their communities. So this has been through programs like Local Foods, Local Places. We've worked with communities on the intersection of local food and downtown revitalization. Our Cool and Connected program, really looking at broadband as a tool for community and economic development in main streets. Our Healthy Places for Healthy People program, partnering with healthcare facilities and thinking about community health in a really broad and expansive way. And most recently for me is the Recreation Economy for Rural Communities program. We're partnering with small towns and rural communities all across the country to help them boost outdoor recreation at the same time as they're revitalizing their main streets. One quick plug for the work program. We are currently accepting applications for that program right now. So hopefully you all have seen that announcement, but we are accepting applications for that program until October 16th. So if you know of any communities who'd be interested in looking at this intersection of outdoor recreation and Main Street revitalization, please encourage them to apply. But the common thread through all of these programs, through all of EPA's work in my time with our office and working with rural communities and small towns has been this common thread of helping communities who care so deeply about their places, the places where they live, work, and play, and wanting to plan for a more sustainable future. And so that's what we've been focused on and working on all this time, and just could not be more thrilled that we have some time today through the Smart Growth Network to really focus on this important topic that's near and dear to my heart. So you already heard introductions of all of our wonderful panelists. We're really excited to have Corey and Christine online with us. So hello, thank you for joining us. And John, Robert, and Joel here in the room with me. So I think we will dive into the discussion pretty quickly, and I will ask some questions. There will also be lots of time for all of you to ask questions, so please be thinking about what questions you'd like to ask our experts here on this panel, and hopefully we'll have a really good dialogue over the course of the next hour or so. So I think to kick us off, I'd love to just ask each of our panelists to just tell us a little bit about yourself, about what you do, and about how you apply smart growth principles in your day-to-day work. So I'll give some time for everyone. So I think I'll start with maybe Corey online, if you are Corey, and just real quick note on Corey. Corey, I know Corey because she participated in the Recreation Economy for Rural Communities program with her community of Wairika, California. So glad that Corey could join. She's also participated in NEA's Citizens Institute on Rural Design program, and so she's a great community representative who's doing great work in her community. So Corey, please tell us about yourself, what you do, and what smart growth principles look like for you in your day-to-day work.
Hi, everyone. It's such a privilege to be here today, and I am presenting from Siskiyou County, California. So if you imagine the very top part of the state, there is more to California above San Francisco or Redding, California. And so our county is 44,000 residents. Our largest city is 7,000, and our smallest cities are around 600 in population. They are distinctive and remarkable in their historical character, and their boom and bust economies that lead us to the setting of what we are today. And so we're very proud of large architectural grandeur in downtowns and expansive spaces to recreate, but they're not always accessible to all or coordinated and connected. And so for me and our perspective at the Siskiyou County Economic Development Council, we are a nonprofit providing our region for a vision for its future, which means we try to introduce concepts and opportunities that our cities and communities aren't quite ready for, but that we see as vital to their future. And so Stephanie has explained a number of remarkable programs and technical assistance that we've accessed. I'll tell you more in a little bit, but I'm really, really happy to be here and help you imagine revitalization in rural through the lens of smart growth. Thanks, Stephanie.
Thank you so much, Corey. I think I'll turn now to Christine. So Christine, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, your role at USDA and with the Rural Partners Network, and how smart growth principles show up for you?
Hey there, wonderful to be here and just very privileged to be in the room with you all. I'm just a fangirl of all these folks that I also see in the chat. John Foster, just wonderful to see you, a friend and colleague from the olden days. I haven't done local foods, local places in quite a bit, but I am Christine Sorensen. I'm with USDA Rural Development. I'm national lead for the rural engagement and for community economic development for the Rural Partners Network. About 30 years in community economic development, starting out as an economic development director for my small town. And just basically as a farm girl from South Dakota, as I said, coming to you from a very rural community, is the idea that rural policy is really important, and that at every level where I've been local, state, regional, and now national, has been trying to carry that voice. And so you'll see, and I'll answer a question later, where that passion has really been trying to be written in a lot of different national initiatives and programs that I've been part of. So what that means, though, for USDA Rural Development is that we are in the room and sometimes in these conversations, but it's around program development. And it's about infrastructure, and we need water, we need housing, we need these things, you know, that our community needs and are emergent. But the thing is that a lot of time, the planning and the work that needs to be done before you get to that kind of project development is really important. So that's been the space and lens that I've been in my career. And we'll talk a little bit more about Rural Partners Network a little bit later on, but that's what it's been built on, is the idea that community voice, place-based. Earlier we heard about, you know, where people live, work, and play, right? That's the important part for rural communities, is their heart is where they live and they want to stay there. And so our job really in the work that we do and the focus of our work has always been about how we can make that a resilient and strategic plan to make that happen, really around the prosperity of making it sure that the federal government, you know, answers to the call, that is doing it right, that is listening, and that hopefully the Rural Partners Network, what we're seeing right now, is really delivering on that question right now. And so I'll talk a little bit more about it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Christine. Okay, I'll turn to my right, John Robert, if you share a little bit more about yourself and your role and what smart growth principles are looking like for you in your day-to-day work.
Thank you, Steph. And I want to say what a pleasure it is to see so many friends from the EPA and USDA that I've had the pleasure to work with over the past 14 years since I've been in Washington, D.C. And before coming to Washington, I lived in a small city in Mississippi my entire life, right in the heart of the downtown, and was privileged to serve as the mayor of that city for 16 years. Now, whether it's for Transportation for America or Smart Growth America, my work is divided into three main phases. One is writing policy and language for Capitol Hill in transportation, land use, and affordable housing. And since Congress is rural dominant, any language you write should honestly and authentically address the needs of rural areas and small towns as much as it does metropolitan areas across this country. And I found that if you articulate it the right way, it resonates on both sides of the aisle. We also provide technical assistance. I'm part of a team that does that to cities and towns of all sizes across the country. I have worked now in over 140 different places in every state in the union, from as small as 875 to as large as 1 million or more. The principles of smart growth apply in both of those size communities. And we learn as much as we impart through those visits, and those visits inform the policy we then write to be used on Capitol Hill. The third is in the implementation and expansion of passenger rail across the country. Much of the passenger rail language in IJA was written by our shop, working both with Commerce and with House, one Republican led at the time, one Democrat led at the time. You couldn't tell the policies apart between them. We're closely involved in reinstituting passenger rail service linking the two polar cities of Mobile and New Orleans, but it's the important smaller cities like Bay St. Louis and Pascagoula, Mississippi, that are going to see the greatest lift from restoring that form of transportation and connectivity across the Gulf.
Thank you so much for that intro. Joel, I'll turn it to you. Tell us a little bit more about your role and what smart growth looks like for you.
Thanks so much. And like my peers on the panel, I'm really excited to be here and look forward to our dialogue. I'm Joel Mills. I'm with the Architects Foundation, which is the nonprofit partner of the American Institute of Architects. So trade association of architects, about 100,000 members, mostly in the US. I run a program called the Communities by Design program, which has been around, like me, for over 50 years now, and responds to communities in need, responds to context. So I've worked in, largest cities in the world, and I've worked in communities that have less than 1,000 residents for sure. My favorite communities, however, are those rural communities, the small communities. And I'm a rural optimist. I've been in this role for 17 years. And the things that I see happening in some of our rural communities are really, really inspiring. It's so exciting to see how things can scale in a small community and then spread regionally, and really gain some momentum over time. And I think this work is all about momentum. We of course work with all of those technical principles of smart growth, but I think what we're trying to do in every process, we have a local steering committee that we're with. It's not a sort of consultancy that's responding to local government. It's responding to a community, where we require them to have a broad-based host community that's co-hosting a public process with us, with the intention that our principles will be ingrained in that place narrative and the lived experience of those communities. So at the end of the day, the idealistic end of it, there's an architect we work with who has said, you should be able to fly over a community and look down on it and understand it, not just the built environment smart growth pieces, but what it represents, what citizenship actually means there, from the privacy of your home to your front porch, to your sidewalk, to the small street, larger street, and all the public places and spaces where we become something bigger. So that's what we're all about, and we love working in those small communities where a grassroots process can become a seminal event in the community that's referenced decades later.
Thank you so much. I love that term, rural optimist. I think I'm gonna steal that.
You get support in the chat for that as well.
Nice. Yeah, I like that one. I too am a rural optimist, but I think that's what this conversation is all about. So thank you so much to all of you for those great intros. I think that's also a good segue to a question that I have for Corey. And Corey, I just wanted to know, for you in Siskiyou County, what does smart growth mean to you? Is it a term that you tend to use in your day-to-day? How do the smart growth principles apply, or maybe not, in the good work that you're doing in your county?
Thanks, Stephanie. And luckily, I'm not hearing this question for the first time. I'm prepared and certainly feel like we're immersed in the principles on a daily basis. We use a lot of terms, right? So revitalization is a term that means something very central to downtown districts, businesses, and city government. And so that's a term. Place-based revitalization is really key right now. A lot of the opportunities focus on a specific census district, and 12 of our 13 census districts in Siskiyou County are recognized by EJ40. So we are coming from a great place of recognition right now federally for work to be done in Siskiyou specifically. And so we really stick to trying to be asset based. What are the do we haves as opposed to do we have not? And there's a lot of positive energy and momentum there. That certainly has been fostered by a lot of the technical assistance programs that we have received. I don't know if I mentioned it earlier, but we are a Citizens Institute Rural Design Workshop recipient. We are a USDA Rural Development RISE recipient. We're EPA Recreation Economies for Rural Communities recipient. And why? Why are these resources landing in Siskiyou? Because we recognize that we could advance with this light touch assistance and investment. Recently, we also applied for the EPA design assistance that's associated with the community change grant, which meant we had expertise landing in Siskiyou, traveling to Siskiyou, coming here to visit us where we are and seeing our story and meeting our residents, community members, leaders, and city leaders, and helping us finesse our plan. Because there is a 3-step staircase to transformative change. And that might be community engagement, then it might be planning, and it might be architecture and design, and then it's implementation. So how can rural step successfully through this staircase, right? And keep optimism, and knowing that this might take 7 years to get through the staircase.
You don't want lights?
And be able to be
Oh,
agile. And so what I can say is these programs specifically are meeting us where we're at. We feel like the leaders within these programs are empathizing and visiting our communities, and the funding structure has allowed it to take place, and it is helping us, again, step through that 3-part staircase to place-based revitalization, where we have buildings that are healthy and thriving and full, and we have people walking from place to place, because in rural there has been challenges. We have 100 years of knowledge behind us and 100 years of knowledge in front of us, and how will we do it differently from the things that were built before us? Because somehow our communities got beautiful things built that stopped in the 80s. I don't think we've built much since 1980, but we want to, and we will again. And we will figure out how. And in the meantime, we're taking care of what we have, repairing what we have through these principles and these funding mechanisms that a lot of people in this room have made possible. So obviously I am coming from a position of gratitude and example of that revitalization staircase I talked about, and being able to advance through all 3 of those steps with agility and optimism, and hopefully being able to do it in an efficient manner. We've been opening the book and closing the book, doing one project at a time. We're learning to try to think of it in batches. If you can do one planning project at a time, can you do 3? So can we move through the staircase faster, and see a pipeline of 10 projects instead of just seeing one? And that's going to cascade together beautifully. Again, the RERC plan, a team came to our community and helped us over several days and a year, in fact, to develop an action plan for outdoor recreation and connection to our economy. So we have a batch of projects identified and vetted that are meaningful to us and supported by local government. So we are better prepared for these programs. So thanks, Stephanie.
Thanks so much, Corey. And I really like that you all focus so much on what's possible and your strengths and your assets rather than what lacks. And I think that really changes the narrative in rural communities. For so long, rural communities have been told this is what you don't have. And instead flipping the narrative and saying, this is what we do have. It really inspires that kind of change that you all have started to make, incrementally, and it's starting to go more exponential. So it's just exciting to see. And thank you also for highlighting the importance of planning that then can lead to implementation. I think that can be a theme in the conversation too. So this kind of segues to a question that I have for Joel. in all the work that you've done with rural communities through your Communities by Design program and other work, what are some of the mistakes or missteps people might make when working in rural communities, especially when trying to apply the smart growth principles?
Yeah, so I love this question, and there's such a laundry list of items here, right? That we could talk an hour just on these, but I want to frame it around two things that I hear these two statements so frequently when we work in rural communities. With every community we work with, there's an application written, and then we do an initial scoping team to understand what kinds of expertise we need, help begin to get the project organized. But when we are on the ground that first time, always I hear, okay, just want you to know, we're a kind of unique community here, right? What works other places might not work here, right? That trepidation, right? Always true, 100% true, and therefore always requires some kind of customized response, especially we're working in public processes. Everything we're doing is working with our increasingly mistrustful public out there, right? So if we're going to get something done, we're going to have popular support. We've got to have a great process. We need to make the process more than a technical exercise, and it needs to not be something off the shelf. And I have seen communities fail on that end miserably, and have something go nowhere. Which leads me to the second quote that I almost always hear, which is, please don't build us a plan. We have plans, they sit on the shelves, right? We need help with implementation strategies, right? And so we don't ever, our final product is a set of strategies and actions, because this game is all about building momentum, right? And so it starts with that process, but having processes that are rooted in the narrative of that place and have cultural aspects that fit that place. And that, runs the gamut of language and all kinds of things, but leads to remarkable, wonderful little pieces of there. So I've worked in rural Vermont. I'll be in rural Vermont next week, but I've worked there where we did a sugar on snow ceremony as the kickoff to our process, because in that region, when you're coming out of what they call coming out of winter, but into the mud season, right? It's the first tap of maple trees, and they have this wonderful delight where they put the maple syrup on fresh driven snow, right? And it's a great treat, but it's also the first social gathering where you're coming out of your own hibernation after winter, right? So it's their time to come together, So that's one example of something that there's no longer, we're not talking about some kind of planning exercise. We are talking about a place conversation. And, at the end of a 4-day event there, people are crying, right? They're so euphoric about all the great things they see in front of them, instead of what we're used to with, these off the shelf things that lead to frustration often. I've seen university programs, I've seen kids in a small community, doing a studio presentation where that community was beyond their frustration point with the pace of change and just got lit into. I mean, poor kids, right? I wanted to talk to the professor, those are opportunities you can't miss, right? And so it's all about everything every community we work in, we have an incremental plan, right? That starts with what you're doing tomorrow with volunteers and no money, and builds. I mentioned I've been in this role for 17 years. So I look at some of these communities that have hundreds of millions of dollars of new investment that started with a volunteer project, just run off hours of those. And I think it's so critical to the work, really getting into understanding that community, and their recognition, knowing that they've been understood.
Thank you. Does any other panelists have an answer to that question too, to add to Joel, in terms of just mistakes or missteps that people might make when working with rural communities? Just wanted to open up to the other panelists, if anyone else had thoughts.
Well, the assumption that answers to good policy for small towns, rural places. The presumption that if you're going to talk about smart growth, you're talking about a metropolitan area in a big city. It works there. And you fail to understand that mayors in cities large and small face the same issues, different order of magnitude of the issue and different order of magnitude of the resources to address it. But yeah, I found that I've known a lot of mayors over the years, but Antonio Villaraigosa, former mayor of Los Angeles, we could sit down and talk about municipal issues and understand each other. And it plays out in smaller places, often very similar to large places. So don't make the assumption that anything I know from a larger place has no application to this smaller place.
Very good points. And I think we often have much more in common than we think we do when we just sit down and talk to each other. And that's a big part of just understanding what each of us is dealing with. So it's interesting that you've seen that in your context as well.
I know I'm not a panelist, but I'm not or something, sorry. So first of all, I appreciate your comments. It reminds me, I'm sure everybody here has heard this, one of our island analogies. If you've been to one rural community, you've been to one rural community. And if you show up and it's really about, and I think one thing that was a commonality that I could speak to each one of the panelists, is that they've been in these communities, been working with these communities for a very long time, and that trust building is critical. And you can't, so coming in and saying, I've got a plan for you, or, I'm with the government and we're here to help. That doesn't bode well, and so you immediately have people say, well, hang on, you don't know, because we're not like the town down the street, because we're here, and this is what we do, and here's our challenges, and here have been the, unfortunately failed attempts, and we don't want to go down that road again. So you need to listen to us and meet us where we are. And I think that's one of the critical elements I'm going to put through Christine out. One of the critical elements of doing the RPN side is really making sure that you have that place space, you have people and communities and connection, so you can actually start delivering solutions and coming up with viable options and really building upon. I think when Corey mentioned, this build upon, and really being intentional about that. So I don't want to, I think I'm pulling all these things together in the same point of what I've heard, but I think that's so important to not miss that and to kind of gloss over that there's a trust aspect here and there's relationship building that's very intentional. And it really is a lifeline to be able to do any smart growth, economic development, all the, there's lovely funding out here now that we haven't had in previous spaces. And so there's all this great opportunity and momentum, but it really starts very much at the grassroots and sitting around people, sometimes kitchen tables and in their county and, in city council meetings and saying, no, but I know this person and I've worked with this person and they can be trusted. And how can we begin to build upon that, those relationships?
Yeah, we always try to distinguish between public relations and public participation, because there's a problem out in the field with folks who they may have a very well-intended agenda, but they come with an agenda that they are trying to sell, whether it's in a public process or not. And given where our publics are now, that's not going to fly. You have to use your ears and respond if you're going to be successful.
Such good points about the trust building piece and how important that is really in any community, especially in rural places. I've heard someone describe it as kind of like moving at the speed of trust. You can't go any faster than that. Like if you get ahead of yourself, you're going to lose people's participation and their willingness to engage. So yeah, thank you very much for those points. It actually relates to a question that I wanted to ask Christine. So if you want to turn to you, Christine, and just thinking about kind of tactical advice on this issue, if there's one, specific piece of advice that you would give us for how to apply smart growth principles in a rural context. Is there something specific you would recommend about working in rural communities from your vantage point, Christine?
Hey, thank you so much. And just to celebrate Venus as a rural desk officer, Ben, Courtney, and others on this call, who are all part of that Rural Partners Network family. So great to see you again. I guess if I could get it down to one, I think more it's about policy and not just one tactic, right? Is the idea that words matter. So there is a trust built, and then there's also the social capital that needs to be built. There's the infrastructure, there's leadership development. It's those soft assets that most people don't think about. So when we were creating Rural Partners Network, we were tasked, like I said, how can the federal government do a better job? Well, what does that really mean? And really it was actually stepping back and listening. Now, that may sound like a very easy, simple way of doing business, but what it really does mean is that we don't put our funds into a meeting or an engagement or or that thing that can go away. It's actually building the relationships that are sustainable. So I guess if to be succinct, our name, our words matter. It's rural, it's partnership building, and it's network building. So we have two strategies, and that's built on those principles, is that first we hired place-based staff. So they live in the communities where they're working, and they're there in partnership, and they're there to create these relationships. So at some point, there's rural communities and community liaisons that we've hired that have Venus's phone number, just to put it simply. I mean, it's that shortening of the communication process, and hence you do build the trust. And so it's building up the over 25 federal agencies that we have there to answer that call of rural communities. And that's very important. It's the fire chief that is really good at his job, but he has been turned down for 3 years in Nevada for the fire truck that he needs to do his job. And that there's a community liaison to really walk through and just not write the grant for him, but really walk him through the process. And it's really in regard to, we as a federal government don't define their prosperity. We did a research design sprint, and we said, well, you know, define prosperity. We want to have the talking point, right? Well, then no, I'm sorry. We define our prosperity. And so it was very important that we built this principle on being agile, truly listening, and not coming with a playbook. I'm not going to touch on that a lot because you all have really had some great points. I know I really want to talk about something that may be quite different from a federal person to speak about, but I feel that we're in a room of practitioners, and whether you know it or not, you are really in the practice of hope. And hope is not a wish. Wish does not have goals, but really hope is, you know, as we heard earlier, that positive energy, that optimism, the idea in the agency that you can do something. So when a community liaison talks to that fire chief and says, no, we can do this. First of all, Jim, let's just sit down and write down what you really want. Tomorrow, we're going to worry about that. It's really the idea that there's goals, there's incremental steps, there's phasing, but there's the idea that everyone has the agency. You as a rural community leader or member and citizen has the equitable voice, and you have the right to have that heard and be part of the plan, and that you have the agency to change today and to have it better tomorrow. So I am a practitioner of that, but I also, the tenets of the teaching that we do within our community liaisons and our place-based staff is to really come to that open hearts, open minds, and really be in the practice of hope, right, for these rural communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine, for that. I totally agree on hope. I think we've seen that so much through a lot of our work with rural communities, just bringing that hope of, you know, you have the agency, the capacity to make change in your community. Corey, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this question that I asked Christine, which is just, you know, tactical advice. When Christine mentioned about capacity building and building capacity in communities, that is what I've seen again and again. It's the people in rural communities who are making things happen. It's the community spark plugs. You know, you're a community spark plug in Siskiyou County. So what is your tactical advice that you share with us and everyone in the room?
I'm seeing a theme right now in my rural area, and I don't know if other people see the same theme, but our mindset isn't ready for major investment, right? We're kind of sitting around being a little bit as we are, which means we know that we want to get together and problem solve together. We know we want to say that we need housing and we need workforce, and we keep saying that. What I'm hungry for is us actually developing the framework for how to get those things. We can identify what we need. We can identify it over and over and over again in lots of meetings. But we do need to push past that naming of things to drive to the framework of how and what the actual network and framework is that will get us the thing we desire. If someone stood in front of us with $1 to $10 million, we would still say, we just really need to meet together. And meeting together isn't the same as implementing 1 to 20 million in your community. So whatever that skill is, whatever that language is to teach us to get ready for capital absorption, could be a really unique skill. Because right now, if you show us 1 to 20 million, we say we just really need to meet together. We need to spend time together talking because we are good at that. And it feels like our language. It feels like how we do things. But when it comes to major investment, there is a more driven framework. So my answer to that is to help us be ready to implement major investment.
Really good point. And I think that's never been more evident with all of the influx of federal funds that have been available in the last year or two. And, seeing whether rural communities are really ready to receive that or not, and have the capacity, have the readiness to be able to say, yep, we've got projects ready to go. And that's where the planning comes in. That's also where, sounds like this mindset shift needs to come in. So yeah, thank you for that point.
Can I just maybe raise one point, and I'm gonna, first of all, sorry, since working for RD for 6 years did things to me that I probably am just never gonna recover. I always think through very much a rural development lens, and I can't help it, so I put my USDA hat on. Sorry, EPA colleagues. I just wanna make note that the brilliance of the RPN, people have been working on this for a very long time, and we talk about a whole of government approach, and I've been in the government for a very long time. I've been for 10 years. And so I remember when we had, and people, I'm dating myself now. I remember when we had, what was it? Christine, help me out. Because there's been a whole bunch of iterations of these different, what was it under Obama? It was
Community Solutions Program.
We had community solutions. We
Stronger
had
economies together. We had
together. We
ready.
had persistent poverty. There was
Yeah.
another one that people were working on, and really it's figuring out ways from a government perspective, and maybe the government speak is, oh yeah, we have all these things together, call such and such, or go to this website. And and there's resources there, and we have all these things. Well, that looks different when you're really going to www.grants.gov and you can't figure out anything. I work for the government, and I'm like, I don't want to go to grants.gov because I can't find anything there. Don't repeat that or say it out loud. But it's challenging. It's just not, they're not user friendly. And we have this, we get in our silos, and what I've heard people say, some agencies say, pillars of excellence, which, to be determined if that's in fact the case. But the brilliance of the RPN is that I've sat in meetings with community liaisons and 4 different federal agencies. And I'm like, okay, so let's talk about these needs. And what does that look like? And to Corey's point, sometimes the communities aren't there. So let's start small. So let's meet you where you think you are, and we can pipeline you to where you need to be with all these different federal resources. So we'll have FEMA on the phone, and we'll have, Department of Interior, and we have Veteran Affairs and SBA and USDA and, EPA. And so if they're talking about infrastructure, I'll pull in a water person because I love EPA, but if we're talking about SRF funding, that's not my ministry. So I have to hand that over to somebody who knows the mechanics of that program and what that looks like and how to actually apply. And if it's eligible, if it's not eligible. Rural development, at the time I was working, I had 40 different programs. I wasn't an expert in all of them. I knew a few of them, but we want to get to yes, and we have to bring the right people. And so I think the beauty, and I don't want to miss the fact that the RPN network process is really bringing all of these different resources and all these different people that really understand the mechanics of these programs to really be able to talk about actually pipelining and meeting people where they are and building capacity and building up that growth. So Christine didn't actually say that, but I also want to highlight how amazing that is. And while we said it all works together, the pragmatic part of that was not happening. Not in every community. Some places, yes, but not across the space where we could really say, okay, yeah, I know these people, I know what's happening in New Mexico, because I talked to FEMA. And I get where they're going and what the challenge is and how we can bring, solutions. And when they get to this space, EPA can come in and take over at that point. Now we have resources now that you've built up to where you can actually apply for something, you're eligible, you have enough infrastructure, we've done some of the TA, some of the engineering work, and it makes sense now.
The importance of all of, truly all of federal government coordinating to make their resources available to rural communities is really, really critical. So it's great that the Partners Network is making so much progress on that. I want to shift gears slightly and just ask a question to John Robert at this point. Given that you've been a small town mayor, you've now worked in hundreds of communities all across the country of all shapes and sizes, especially rural places, recognizing that rural communities are not a monolith, they're not all the same. When you've seen one rural community, you've seen one rural community, how do they differ from each other? And how does this change the approach that you might take to help?
So there is a large telecommunications company that wanted to expand its footprint in the small towns and rural places. So they reached out to us and said, would you help us guide our outreach so that it's authentic and speaks honestly to these small towns and rural places? So in reviewing their ads and their marketing, I had to tell them, you know, every image you use has someone holding a chicken or a pig. That doesn't capture rural America anymore. Even those people with chickens and pigs need a small urban place where they get healthcare, they get education, they get entertainment. They get the needs of life. There are places where they shop. What we've done, I think USDA has 15 definitions of rural places.
Depends on which agency, yes, sir.
We boiled it down to 7 rural typologies, and we use this in conversations with the places that we visit to help them really dig deep into who they are. And you've got to know how you started, and is that still of importance today? So one would be resource dependent. Perhaps it's coal, timber, being on a waterway or a rail line for your existence. Another is a gateway community. You're at the doorway to a national park or a state park or a coastal area. You've developed as a retirement community. You have a lovely environment and seniors are choosing to move there. It's affordable and it's comfortable. You're a traditional Main Street community. You have that grid. You've always had that. You have a mix of historic architecture in the downtown that speaks to you, certainly to your past. Perhaps you're a college community. I'm thinking of Normal, Illinois, that didn't exist until the Normal College was placed in this part of Illinois and needed a town to grow up to support it. Or you're an edge community. You're literally on the fringe of a metropolitan statistical area. You're not that part of that urban piece. You're still have your rural identity, but you're right there on the edge of it. Or you're a tribal community. And that doesn't mean you're a part of the tribe. Maybe it's the tribe is an important economic development entity and cultural entity within the history of your community. When we're working with places, I ask them 3 questions. Who were you in the past? And you have to dig into these 7 typologies. And in doing so, they're not one of them. They'll find there are 3 or 4 of these definitions. So that's who you were, why you came about in the first place. And then you have to ask yourself, who are you now? And that's a tough one because you've got to look at yourself, warts and all, as to what you've become based on your initial assets. And then the third question is clearly the most important, and that is, who do you aspire to be? What is your vision for your community 20 years from now? When you go home, what do you tell your children this place will be in 20 or 30 years? As they dig through these questions and answers, no longer is economic development for them, because it's not that rural places want to get bigger, but they do want to have a more robust local economy and a more sustainable economy. And it's no longer based on, I've got a big piece of land, I've got highway access and a little water, therefore I've got an economic development. More and more, the golden ticket for your prosperity is a sense of place. And it's being authentic to who you were and who you aspire to be to the future. And I think if we get a community talking about that aspirational goal and addressing what the young people want for the future, then you can get them to do some remarkable things. And the nice thing about working with a small town, you can turn that ship quickly. You just need a few dedicated people committed to a new vision for the community, and it's a lot easier to turn Bay St. Louis than it is a very large metropolitan area. And again, it's the people who believe in the future of that particular place. And I found that's what resonates in places that you go to.
Well said. I like that. Who were you? Who are you? And who do you want to be? I think that's a good framework. And that's kind of why we do planning, I think, in large part, so.
Well, and you get them to look at the place, you know. If you've ever been in a local government, you don't want to talk about zoning. The Z word at a council meeting brings out all the pitchforks. So you talk about, instead of zoning, how do you want your community to look? Well, they'll talk about that. And of course, in talking about how they want it to look, leads them into decisions about land use and affordable housing and transportation connectivity. And again, when you don't, lots of times I'll never say the word smart growth. It's about how you use your assets. And again, it's very fiscally conservative. You've already built streets in your downtown. You've got drainage, you've got street lighting, water and sewer, your fire department's close by, your police department's there, your schools are close by. Give those areas new life and robust life again, instead of building out into the hinterlands, which you can never afford to serve. So it's very fiscal from a local government standpoint. I'm using what someone else built 100 years ago and giving it new life.
Great, thank you so much. I think what I'm taking away from this conversation is that the smart growth principles apply no matter what size the community, and that even if they're implemented in slightly different ways, the same issues apply in a rural context versus an urban.
And I do want to say, since Ben is to my left, all of this though comes back to the art of a place. It's the art of the architecture itself. It's the storytelling of the community. How it looks, how you tell your story, how you celebrate your past, all of those things involve visual, the spoken word, the lore of the place. That's important to be able to share, certainly with your guests, more importantly, to your children and grandchildren.
Awesome. Well, I have so many more questions for the panelists, but I want to pause and see if anyone in the room or online might have questions for our panelists as well. We have a few more minutes, so maybe I'll look to Kelsey. Are there any questions that have come in online? Okay.
Not yet.
Okay, so feel free to add your questions if you have them. We have one in the room, so I'll take one from John Thomas.
Yeah, so this may be particular to a subset of rural communities, but, and I think movement and migration in the pandemic world is part of the backstory here, but what does the conversation look like in rural communities that might be tipping on the edge of becoming a victim of their own success from an affordable housing affordability standpoint of actually being successful in what other rural communities may struggle with and getting people to move to the place or stay in the place you have been being in? So, but maybe some experiences you all have had around that housing affordability as an issue in rural places.
Well, you've got to address it before it begins to change. So I live on H Street here in DC. Once the streetcar was announced, before it was ever built, property values started escalating. You needed to address affordability, and I watched my neighbors move out because of that, could no longer afford to live there. That's a shame because it drastically changed the character of the place, which was very mixed, which I like. So you've got to get ahead of it. And when we're talking to those smaller cities that have had beginning to have some great success, you know, we talk about you've got to have a strategy. So if you want young couples to move, they've got to have an affordable place to live. Irwin, Tennessee, one of my favorite small towns, they've done so well in their small, we're talking about 7,500 people, small downtown redevelopment. They can't build enough housing fast enough. Where do you put it and what's it going to cost for those young families who are coming in? And you want your place to be able to attract those the bright young workforce of the future, but they got to afford to live there. And the jobs will follow them. And of course, Irwin's looking to the second and third floors for apartments that will be affordable. They're using what were lots, abandoned lots. And, you know, every place you go to, they'll say, well, we're built out. And, you know, my good friend Chris Zimmerman would always remind me, you know, well, Manhattan was built out in 1700, you know, that didn't stop it. So it's always about how you can add more housing and economic development. And looking above the first floor, being intentional, working with developers, and Irwin had to do this to say, yes, you can build these huge houses outside of town. We can't afford to service that. Let's look at a new model in the city limits that will be affordable. But once it's out of the bag, there isn't any turning back.
Other
I think-
thoughts from the panel?
If I may, just real quick too. You know, just to fine tune the point of mixed use development, and that is definitely from the lens of rural development. We are assisting and hope to assist those that are underserved and are lower middle income, right? And so it's always keeping our eye on that. And I'm going to use an example in Fulton County. They hadn't had a new house built since 2008. And so they are an RPN community. And so there's been this momentum. First, it started with a housing assessment, mixed use, right? We knew that our lens was getting families into houses. And it wasn't to where it was that mid or higher income. It was really to get a house built, and it's sweat equity, and they're helping to build the house, etc. So what happened though is that these houses started to be built, small families were able to move in, and then the private sector decided that, oh, there is a niche here where now we can start building these middle to housing units. And so it's a partnership in the development, and not an if or a one or a done. It's that you never lose sight of those that need it the most, right? And that it's planned use. And I think to that point, and the whole theme, right, is really planning and setting aside those green spaces and those beginning housing options for those families, those working families.
John, you
Thanks.
remember the Hope Six program? We were the last city funded with Hope Six funds after fighting for it 7 years. But it's not just downtown, it's the neighborhoods adjacent to that downtown. But they've got to be planned using smart growth approaches as well. You know, we tore down these warehouses for humanity that passed for public housing and built individual homes or duplex homes, but on wide sidewalks, street lighting, landscaping, little park in the center of the effort, building what any one of us would want in the proper neighborhood. And yet it's very affordable, and the 28% were built that they could be rent to own. And when the first member of a family in their collective memory owns a home, that is transformational for that family, but for the community, because all of a sudden they understand I'm a part and I matter and I need to participate. And you take a conservative congressman or senator and you get them to meet and shake hands with that individual who's in a house for the first time in her family's history, and she weeps in appreciation for that opportunity. Transform that individual. You never have to worry about where they're going to be on affordable housing.
I just want to add, I think this is a huge issue, right? And I'm going to jump into an interesting case next week. We'll be working with 4 rural towns in Vermont, the Brattleboro region, they're not victims of their own success, they're victims of changing circumstances. So, you know, to start, they have very limited infrastructure, right? Wastewater is a huge issue. They have specific topography that limits where you can develop. And they've had the pandemic. So now you've had the influx of wealthy folks buying second homes in the area. They have a ski resort in the area, so they have the seasonal labor surge and housing need. And then they've had climate overlaid on that with flood after flood that are taking units out of the market, right? And they've had the folks who are buying units and then turning them into rentals, right? And every unit matters. Every unit matters. The upside is when you are that small, every unit matters, and it doesn't take that much to begin making a real difference on it if you do the right things. So, I mean, we haven't had the conversation yet, but, you know, just thinking about all the creative ways that you can create more units out of the existing stock, and where you can build. I think there's a lot of opportunity, but it's a huge issue. We're seeing that in small communities all over the country.
We did get one question online, so maybe we can round it out with that question. Karen, do you want to come off mute and ask it, or do you want us to ask it? I'll ask it. So Karen asked, how does the panel view the role of the arts community and the creative economy in the revitalization of rural communities?
Huge.
Corey, I see you coming up.
Well, and Christine addressed it as well.
Oh, good.
She
Okay.
typed it.
Um,
Oh, great.
I asked that question, sorry, I was slow to unmute. I asked that question because I see a lot of people here from, I don't see very many people from arts agencies, from state art agencies on the call. And I joined because my task is to help rural communities develop their creative economy in those local rural communities. So I logged on today to try to find out where would be the best places for me to go or me to direct them to first, because you have like a small community. I'm going to pick on one, Independence, Missouri. They have a creative arts district called the Inglewood Arts District, and they have they revitalized, they brought back the old puppet theater. They're trying to bring back the movie theater. They've got a multidisciplinary arts district, arts building. But the biggest thing they've done that they're proudest of is they worked with local developers and the banking community to create housing packages specifically for artists who don't have traditional credit histories and couldn't buy homes. And so now by waiving that aspect of the credit application for artists, they've got artists who are moving back into the community, as first-time home buyers and revitalizing arts in their rural community. And I was just wondering, have you guys heard about, so that's kind of an innovative thing, and are you aware of any other ideas like that, or new initiatives like that I can take back to, my Missouri counties? Thank you.
Sure, and I'd love to just hear any of the panelists' responses to that. Of course, I would say NEA is a great partner on a lot of these fronts, and there are so many good examples of communities where art and the creative economy is just, front and center. But Corey, I saw you coming off mute.
Yeah. I mean, let's start with art heals, and that's a soft word for me to say as an economic developer, right? But when there's a community that is burnt to the ground, murals are one of the first things that shows a sign of resurgence or restorative action. These folks know how to make things beautiful with the incredible skill that they have that is not any different than an engineer, right? So for your community to acknowledge that an artist comes to you with a lifetime of curating their skill and a willingness to share that skill. So recognizing that that's a workforce that deserves to be paid and not always just volunteering their grace and expertise, because it's pretty incredible. Their ability to bridge division through art and beauty, to rewrite, not rewrite history, but heal history. So like, we have made mistakes in the west of California. And what do our places say now moving forward? And it's usually artists who tell that story and help us articulate that movement first. And we see and know and recognize this. The next step is paying them for the work that they do also. So for me, I usually think of them as an incredible expert deserving of payment for what they do in those networks. So I hope I gave that justice.
You need a job at the NEA.
They're
You're singing all our songs.
I know we're running short on time and this question deserves a lot more deeper answer. I will say I was just in Morganton, North Carolina and Old Fort, North Carolina last week for an event with a conservation fund. And those are two examples of communities where art is helping to tell a more full story of their community, both its past and its present. So just a little teaser. Hopefully I can put some of that information in the chat later, but I know we need to wrap up and turn to our breakout sessions shortly, but just wanted to thank the panel and everyone for your questions and your participation. But thank you again for sharing your wisdom and expertise with all of us. So thank you.
Thank you.
Maybe it's a segue to our next step, since I am here representing with others, the NEA, we're definitely implicated in the last question. Just a couple things to quickly throw out. The Citizens Institute on Rural Design, which was mentioned a few times by myself, Escala, and Courtney, rural-design.org, thank you. Is a great resource for certainly how design plays out in rural communities and the work that we with our partners do. And that end, creative placemaking.us is our creative placemaking technical assistance website. We, much like the conversation we just had, have had a long internal debate about whether or not to call out rural projects, creative placemaking projects versus more urban ones. And so far, we have not, much for the reasons that John Robert just mentioned, and urban examples have lots of residents in rural places and vice versa, but it's still possible to search for case studies on that site by rural places. Springboard for the Arts is another great organization, one of our grantees that does quite a bit of work in rural Minnesota, as well as surrounding states in the upper Midwest, and there are many, many others that we can share in the chat later. Escala's reminding me very subtly that we have a magazine which we'll hand out to the people here in the room. We can share a link online. This is our latest issue of American Artscape, which has at least a couple of projects I think that have just come up, maybe coincidentally, I don't think that was on purpose, focused on infrastructure in the built environment and arts. And an answer is actually the question was just asked rather well. So we'll give you all, if you don't already have one, a physical copy in just a moment, and then again, share that link for those of you who are joining us virtually. Okay, we're going to transition now into our breakout discussions. And hopefully some of my EPA colleagues will remind me of some of the details about getting this wrong, but I believe everyone who is online will be assigned to a breakout room. So you just need to sit tight and click the accept or the yes button when it shows up on your screen, which will then move you into a room. And we will share the guiding breakout questions in the chat for those of you. I'll read them out in just a moment.
And they were actually emailed to you as well in the agenda that went out before the meeting started today. So the breakout questions are in there too.
And once that is done, those of you who are here in the room with me in person will just count off by ones and twos like we all did in elementary school, and then divide into rooms that way. But I'll just read the questions for anyone who doesn't have them in front of them. There are 4 questions we want everyone to try to touch on. Number 1, do you work in rural communities in your current role? Why or why not? Is there room to expand? That is essentially the introduction question. We want you all to get to know each other. 2, whether you work in rural communities or not, are there lessons you'll take away from today's discussion to apply in your own work? Hopefully the answer to that is yes. Number 3, what other observations do you have about which smart growth principles may be more or less relevant in rural communities beyond what we heard in the panel discussion? And finally, number 4, how can the Smart Growth Network help support rural communities, whether as a whole or in our individual roles? So with that, I think virtual folks will be subdivided and we'll gather back here in 35, 40 minutes, 4:45, and make our way to a happy hour after that. Anything I've forgotten? Nope. All right, thank you. So for those of us in the room today, I will just lead by example and start with number 1.
2.
1,
2.
1.
2.
Thank you all. Are you wrapping this up?
Yeah. Very sure for now, people.
Yeah.
Am I on mute or am I on mute?
People in the room, you're silent.
We'll be just a minute. We're allowing everybody else to walk back into the room, and then Ben will give his closing remarks.
Thanks.
Welcome back, everybody. We're gonna wrap up kind of quickly, because we have about 10 minutes until 5 o'clock, and we're standing between everyone and happy hour, of course. Want to give folks a chance to just report out. We don't need full summaries of everything you talked about, but anyone who's interested in sharing what you all discussed, especially the virtual folks, since we couldn't hear anything you all were saying, love to hear it. Maybe 2 to 3 minutes for each group. And I'll just open it up to volunteers if anybody wants to chime in. If not, I'll call on folks.
I can go quickly if the virtual people are still figuring it out. These are all kind of disparate, but one of the things that stuck with me from the panel discussion and from our breakout was housing and how that seems to be a continuing problem. I was just in Cheyenne for our building blocks program, and we talked more about housing, I would say, than anything else. And then another thing that multiple people in our group liked was the visioning aspect of it that John Robert touched on, where you've been, where you're going, and making things more than a technical exercise, which I think is important. And then just making some of these concepts more approachable. And so, like, to the question about you talk about things differently, if it feels like it's a community that might be overwhelmed or resistant to bigger words, you know, like electrifying or mixed use development or things like that. Hugh pointed out that walkability is one of his favorite principles, because if you're getting walkability, you're often getting a bunch of the other principles too. And so leading with the principles that seem the most likely to resonate with people, and then using those as a way to incorporate more than just that. Yeah, I think that was.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I can report out from our virtual group. Yeah, which I think that everyone could see all of our high chat activity. But we actually had 2 representatives from rural communities. And so we basically just answered, we went a little rogue on the questions and just answered any questions that they had. And so it was definitely just a reminder that, yeah, kind of that as the federal family, we are here to serve rural communities. And so it was a great use of time kind of talking through. And I would love if anyone has any additional insights to the questions I posed for the larger group, which is any success stories that addressed keeping kind of the look and a feel of a historic downtown with new construction. Examples like zoning. I believe that Pennsylvania Wilds, Stephanie, might have been a good success story, but if anyone has anything else. And then also any success stories that address affordable housing for seasonal workers and seasonal tourism driven communities. So we know that that has come up a lot whenever we're talking to small towns and outdoor recreation, kind of seasonal work, but wanted to kind of open this up to the larger group to see if there's any additional success stories to share. But overall, really great panel, really great breakout, and thank you all.
Thank you for that. I'll quickly slip on my semi-retired Smart Growth America hat and just share that I know, just because I've worked on some of these projects, that SGA has worked on some of those seasonal affordable housing projects in the past. Jerry is still here.
Nothing
I'm
comes
sure.
to mind, but I'm sure we have some.
I'm sure there are
examples
some
there.
case studies on the website. I can't think of any off the top of my head, but I know that there are a bunch on there. Maybe other folks who can think of things can share them in the chat right now. Anyone else would like to report out from the virtual world?
I can share from our group. So we had a really great discussion about the roles of arts councils and creative districts for rural placemaking. Karen from our group is really involved in that space and had a lot of really wonderful examples of what that looks like and some of the programs they're rolling out in Missouri to like help that process along, which is really exciting to learn about. And then we also talked a lot about arts as a community asset. And someone brought up this point where like there's a lot of talk about workforce development, about small business, but like arts is not often a part of that equation. And so like how artists themselves are entrepreneurs, and when you have like art districts or art spaces, that has a lot of spin-off amazing benefits for the local economy, either through restaurants or the people that are work themselves in that space, and how that can contribute to, you know, a small town's identity and produce some economic benefit as well. So we talked about a lot of other great things, but those are just some of the big points that stuck out to me.
Great, thank you for sharing that. Anyone else, including my group? Who did we say was? Yes, please.
Okay, so I'll do my best to create a thread here. Capacity is sort of where we started with capacity building, which is something we all think about writ large, but especially in rural, given much more limited, especially on the professional staff for the communities. But I think which also led to a thread of several examples and points around the need to be creative and flexible in your approaches in rural. Whether it was micro grants, right? You brought up this idea instead of the two $10,000 grants, maybe the approach of 20 small $1,000 grants to artists, or even just that role of arts, schools, things like that, in terms of building that vision and that identity for place that helps drive the conversation forward to, again, I really love Corey's analogy of the steps, right? The getting to those next steps and the role that building that kind of community vision to propel you forward, that creativity and flexibility, I think, kind of came up in our group about the ways to do that. So much more important. So that was, anybody else, does that spur anything else for anybody else in my group, things I'm missing?
I think with regard to art in particular, two lessons that I took away was that boldness is encouraged and there's actually benefits. If there's like a bold street crossing design, people may be more likely to slow down. And with the micro grant, the example that was given was like a bubble maker. And for me, I think that's just fascinating, because if it attracts people to a certain area, it's not just a mural, it's something that people purposely go to. That's what I took.
Okay, thank you for that. Anyone else, or have we heard from all of the groups now? This is totally optional, so I'll just wait 3 more seconds.
I think that was all the groups.
That
There
was all
were
the groups.
2 and 2.
Oh, there were 2 and 2,
We ended
okay.
up condensing 2 of them.
Thank you for that
Yeah.
assistance with the math.
Yeah.
Well, that wraps us up then. So I'll just close with a couple housekeeping things. I've been told to announce that December 4th is the next, is that correct? December 4th is the next quarterly discussion of the Smart Growth Network at the National Association of Realtors, which I've never been to, but here is a beautiful, wonderful space. So looking forward to that. And I understand the focus will be on housing, which I know we talked quite a bit about today, but we'll focus even more on that at our next discussion. And for those of you that have not heard, our happy hour starting immediately when I stop talking will be at City Bar, which is 400 East Street, Southwest in Washington, DC, about a block and a half from where we are now, those of us in person. If any of you are virtual and we're not able to attend in person, but can make it to the happy hour, you of course are welcome to join us at City Bar. We'll see you there in 5 to 10 minutes. Thank you again, everyone, and have a great day.
Yvonne has her hand up.
Oh, yes.
Just a quick announcement. I'm sorry that I'm not able to join you as I would like to at the happy hour, but it's great. I'm Yvonne Marcy. I work on the SGN team, and I just wanted to share for those who may not have heard, we're EPA in cooperation with the Smart Growth Network is getting ready to launch a Sustainable Communities Accelerator Network, and it will be an opportunity for communities in teams to work together and in a peer learning context over the course of 9 months to implement a local sustainability action. And so if you are, we really are excited to have everyone share about this with your networks and get the word out. and have people apply. And there will soon be a website about this. But if you would like to hear more about it, we would like to, and to know when it's open, we would like to invite you to subscribe to our newsletter, where we'll be announcing that hopefully within the coming month or so. And we are very excited to tell you more about it as that becomes available. So I'm going to drop our newsletter into the chat here, and hopefully some of the EPA people in the room also have cards with this. So we are excited to share this and would love to have you join our newsletter and share the news about the Sustainable Communities Accelerator Network. Thanks so much.
Great, thank you for that. Any other announcements before I wrap this up? All right, well, thank you again to Jennifer and Courtney, especially on my team, for helping organize today, and all the EPA folks who helped organize as well.
Thank you, Brad.
Ben, you're welcome. Absolutely. Happy to host you all, and thanks for all of you for being here, and to all the panelists and everyone joining us virtually from around the country. See you at happy hour in a few minutes. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.